Join me as I reflect on the books I read in 2023 and use book brackets to figure out my favourite book of the year. Hello and welcome to my first YouTube video. I'm Charlotte and I'm passionate about reading, crafting and journaling. I am neurodivergent and I'm learning to unmask and truly become unapologetically my authentic self. Leaning into my special interests and unabashedly appreciating the beauty in the everyday mundane moments of life help me to stay grounded. I'm starting this channel as an extension of my Instagram @theliterarycrafter, where for the last year I have shared monthly reels full of joyful moments and everyday beauty I've found in the world. I'm hoping this channel will give me the opportunity to be more creative, the chance to talk about my interests, and hopefully I can meet others with the same interests. Here is a quick glimpse of the monthly reels I have shared on my Instagram. This year I'm hoping to share more in-depth videos of magical moments, where I can also talk about books I've been reading as well as craft projects I've been working on. I plan on sharing journal flip-throughs too. And then there will be clips of nature, lots of beaches and pretty skies that I find beautiful. In the coming months, my wife and I and our Cavalier King Charles Bertie will be moving to Scotland, so this channel will also be a way for me to share our adventures with family and friends. Plus, I am extremely sentimental, and documenting these moments will be a treasure to look back on, and a natural extension of my daily journal and monthly reels. I'll share more about me in future videos, and I plan on doing the Bookstagram newbie tag soon, but I tend not to share my face too much, so most videos will be mindful and comfortable for me. With that being said, if you like reading, crafting or journaling, are neurodivergent or are a cozy introvert who appreciates the mundane glimmers in life, please click subscribe and like this video if you like. Without further ado, let's get talking about books. 2023 was the first year that I have used book brackets to determine my favourite book of the year, and it was so much more difficult to do than I had initially thought. First, I'll share what I read each month before putting my top picks into brackets. In 2023, I read 60 books, which amounted to 20,408 pages, and broke down into 38 physical books and 22 Kindle books. Here are all the books I read. I will go into more detail next, or you can pause here and have a nosy if you like. I'm on Goodreads, and I use the app to track my reading alongside keeping a book journal. I'll link to my Goodreads account in the comments section. This is a template I'll be using to do my book brackets. You can find this in the highlights on my Instagram, along with a 2024 version and monthly roundups, if you'd like to do the same. But first, I'll break down my year into months. In January, I read 5 books: Small Things Like These and Foster by Claire Keegan, Book Lovers by Emily Henry, Different Not Less by Chloe Hayden, and The Travelling Cat Chronicles by Hiro Arikawa. I was really impressed with Keegan's writing, and despite them being my first reads of 2023, 12 months later they're still memorable to me. Different Not Less is Hayden's account of living with autism and ADHD, and was insightful and inspiring, and The Travelling Cat Chronicles was both heartwarming and heartbreaking, depicting the relationships we make with our pets. But my favourite book of January has to be Book Lovers by Emily Henry. It is the first book of Henry's that I read, and the small town enemies to lovers trope was perfectly intertwined with an ode to books. I highlighted a few quotes in this book, but my absolute favourite is there anything better than iced coffee and a bookstore on a sunny day? I mean, aside from hot coffee and a bookstore on a rainy day. On to February next, where I read 5 books. A reread of The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss, The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, and How to Kill Your Family by Bella Mackie. Each year I try and make sure I reread at least one of my favourites, as I tend to focus on reading new books from my TBR and ignore past reads. In 2022 I reread Sylvia Plath's The Bell Jar, in 2021 it was Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, and in 2023 it was The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, which was still as haunting and mysterious as ever. Ghost Wall is my third Sarah Moss novel, and it did not disappoint at all. It further solidified my love of Moss's writing. The Outsiders was a book borrowed from a friend who said it was her favourite, and it reminded me of West Side Story. I picked Hamnet up in a charity shop, and I was really glad that I finally got to read it, as I've been putting it off. Historical fiction isn't really my cup of tea, but I was surprised at how much I loved this story of Shakespeare's wife and children. How to Kill Your Family was unfortunately disappointing. I was hoping it was going to be a quick and funny read, but I found that it dragged on and quickly lost its momentum. My favourite of February had to be Hamnet, but it was closely followed by Moss's Ghost Wall. I was transported back in time in Hamnet, and was pleasantly surprised by the mystical pagan narrative, and the book genuinely brought me to tears with its portrayal of grief. I read 4 books in March: The Cloisters by Katie Hayes, The Perfect Couple by Jackie Kabler, I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy, and Drama Queen by Sarah Gibbs. The Cloisters is an absolutely stunning book. The cover is beautiful and gothic, a skull made up of herbs and butterflies embellished with a gold border and tiny moon vases. This dark academia book tells of a tarot deck and kept me guessing throughout. Another book which kept me guessing throughout was The Perfect Couple, a thriller that was chosen for a book club I was in. I had so much fun reading this book, and I kept messaging a friend who had already read the book with all my whodunit guesses, which we both found amusing. I'm Glad My Mum Died is McCurdy's memoir, and brought to life the child abuse she experienced, the difficult relationship she had with her mother, and the damaging experiences of child actors. Drama Queen is another memoir. Gibbs writes about her late autism diagnosis, growing up different, and experiencing autistic burnout as a woman, which really resonated. The reality that many autistic women damage their mental and physical health, reaching burnout before they realise they are autistic, and have spent their entire lives using all their energy to mask, to try and fit in, but they're still told they're not trying hard enough, are lazy, or just being drama queens. As a late diagnosed autistic woman who has always been told that I'm too sensitive, I really felt this book, and I'm grateful for the women who are writing about their experiences and raising awareness. My favourite for March was a difficult one to choose, as I was torn between The Cloisters and I'm Glad My Mum Died, but I chose McCurdy's memoir as I didn't want to discredit the bravery of sharing her experiences with the world. It was a close call though. I only read 2 books in April: Still Life by Sarah Winman and The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Still Life is a historical fiction that was recommended to me by my best friend Amelia, who you can find on YouTube as Amelia Barlow Books. I'll link her channel in the comments. This book, if I could describe in one phrase, would be It's a Small World, and it's a beautiful, heartwarming novel set in Italy with a vibrant set of characters. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo was the third of Reid's books that I have read, and although I still enjoyed it, I didn't think it quite lived up to Daisy Jones and the Six and Malibu Rising. I did appreciate the LGBT characters in this book though, and it was still great. Still Life had to be my favourite book of April, and despite historical fiction not being my favourite, it's the second in this genre that has made it 2 monthly favourites. Winman's writing is exquisite, and the experience of reading Still Life reminded me of when I read Gerald Durrell's Corfu trilogy. On to May next, when I read 8 books: The Chemist by Stephanie Meyer, The Pachinko Parlour by Eliza Dussapin, Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford, If Cats Disappeared from the World by Genki Kawamura, Every Summer After by Carly Fortune, The Keeper of Lost Things by Ruth Hogan, When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit by Judith Kerr, and Broken Dolls by James Carroll. The Chemist has been on my TBR for a couple of years, and I was amazed by this thriller which was just so different than Twilight or The Host, and I couldn't put it down. The Pachinko Parlour was a haunting piece of Asian literature that I found difficult to contextualise and thought it was quite odd. Somebody's Daughter is a memoir telling of Ford's difficult upbringing, and If Cats Disappeared from the World was another funny piece of Asian literature which wasn't what I was expecting and really reminded me of Bruce Almighty. Every Summer After was a book club pick, and I thought it was great even if I was horrified by the plot twist. At this point, my wife and I knew that we'd be moving house soon, so I started to focus on physical books I had on my shelf so that I could either then send them to friends or give to charity. I also set myself 24 hours to read as much as I could, so the following 3 books were finished in a weekend. The Keeper of Lost Things was a charming book which I enjoyed more than I thought I would, and the most memorable takeaway is that every object has a story. When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit is a semi-autobiographical account of a child's perspective of fleeing Germany in the World War II, and despite it being a children's book, it was good to see history through the eyes of a child. I had had Broken Dolls on my shelf for over 7 years, and it was such a page-turner I couldn't believe it took me so long to read it. I'll be looking to read more in the Jefferson Winter series in the future, as this one was so good. My favourite pick of the month was Maya's The Chemist, but was closely followed by Broken Dolls. I was so impressed by the amount of research Maya must have put in order to write this book. It was action-packed and I stayed up late reading as I couldn't put it down. In June, I read 2 books, both thrillers, Our House by Louise Candlish and The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. I picked up Our House in a charity shop after reading The Heights in 2021, and I thought it was an interesting plot about a husband selling their house without his wife knowing, who only finds out when she returns from a trip to find another family moving in. The Girl on the Train is another book I'd had on my shelf for around 7 or 8 years, and after thoroughly enjoying it, again, I couldn't believe it took me so long to read it. I chose The Girl on the Train as my favourite for June, as it kept me guessing, and I thought the elements of amnesia added to the mystery. In July, I read 5 books, 2 more from my shelves, then switched to Kindle as everything was packed up for the move. I read Playing Big by Tara Moore, A Spell of Winter by Helen Dunmore, The Herd by Emily Edwards, My Mother, Munchausen's and Me by Helen Naylor, and The Premonitions Bureau by Sam Knight. Playing Big was recommended to me by a friend who knew I was having a difficult time, and is a great book for women wanting to progress in their careers and become more self-aware. I liked Moore's suggestion that even when a woman has little confidence, she is still an inspiration to someone somewhere. A Spell of Winter was a charity shop find and was an odd and incredibly haunting and atmospheric historical fiction of an incestuous relationship between brother and sister. The Herd was a book club pick and was thought-provoking narrative about children and vaccinations with a plot twist at the end. My Mother, Munchausen's and Me is Naylor's memoir of growing up with a difficult relationship with her mother, and was an interesting account of narcissism. Finally, The Premonitions Bureau is a non-fiction summary of research and recollection of people who had been able to predict major historical events, and was a compelling read. My favourite book of July was The Herd, as it was a quick and easy read that made me think of vaccinations, which I have always taken for granted. It would have followed with Dunmore's A Spell of Winter, as the writing was so atmospheric. August was primarily a hockey romance month, a new genre for me, and I read 8 books, Lucky Hit, Between Periods, Blissful Hook, Vital Blindside, Craving the Player, Taming the Player, all by Hannah Cohen. The Night She Disappeared by Lisa Jewell, and Icebreaker by Hannah Grace. I was introduced to Hannah Cohen's Swift Hat Trick series by my friend Phoebe, who you can find on Instagram as What Phoebe Reads, and it's the first time I've read sports romance. I really enjoyed all of Cohen's books that I've read so far, and I have a few left on my TBR for 2024. These books were easy, funny, and spicy with a strong element of found family, and I've definitely been drawn into romance as a genre in 2023. The Night She Disappeared is the second of Jewell's books that I have read, and it was amazing. So fast-paced and extremely difficult to put down. As with previous thrillers, where my friend had read the book first, I messaged all of my guesses and theories and then found that she'd got a bonus chapter which wasn't included in my book despite buying them from the same shop. So I got her to send me pictures so I could read it too. The last book of August was Icebreaker, which was another hockey romance, and I enjoyed it just as much as I did Hannah Cohen's books. I have Wildfire on my TBR for this year, which is the next book after Icebreaker. I have to pick The Night She Disappeared for my favourite of this month. All I wanted to do was read, and the book was dynamic, twisting and turning all over the place, which I think makes for a great thriller. I still have to read The Family Remains, which follows on from The Family Upstairs. On to September, where I read 9 books. Beach Read by Emily Henry, Odd Girl Out by Laura James, Maybe in Another Life by Taylor Jenkins Reid, The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore, The Whistling by Rebecca Netley, Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young, Hex Appeal by Kate Johnson, Brand of Magic by K.M. Jacques, and The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams. I read a lot this month, in part due to having a weekend away, and because I took part in a 24-hour readathon with colleagues to raise money for the Alzheimer's Society. Beach Read was another romance that I thought I had a lot of similarities to Henry's Book Lovers. I really liked this book, but Book Lovers is my favourite of the two. Odd Girl Out is James's experience of gaining a late diagnosis of autism as a woman, and is a great book about the thoughts and feelings that can be overwhelming after diagnosis. Maybe in Another Life played on the idea of a parallel universe, which was interesting, but I struggled to keep up with which version of events I was reading about, and it's my least favourite novel by Reid so far. It really did make me want a cinnamon roll though. The Pumpkin Spice Cafe was so charming and perfectly autumnal. If you like all things autumn, small town romance, and are a fan of Gilmore Girls, I'd definitely recommend this book to you. The Whistling was a haunting and spooky book set in the 1800s, and it was so good I read it in a day. Spells for Forgetting was an atmospheric, witchy book that was mysterious and part thriller, and I was fascinated with the personification of the island on which the events took place. Hex Appeal was another magical, witchy book that was also a romance, and it was so funny in places that I laughed out loud. Brand of Magic was disappointing. The book had a lot of potential, but it was lacking and felt unfinished. And The Cheat Sheet was another sports romance, which I was drawn to as one of the main characters is a dancer, and I thought it was good, but didn't quite enjoy it as much as the hockey romances I read in August. It was really, really hard to pick a favourite for September. I was torn between The Pumpkin Spice Cafe and Spells for Forgetting, as they were both so good, but overall I think Young's writing had the edge over Gilmore's, so it had to be Spell for Forgetting. In October I read 6 books. The State of Grace by Rachel Lucas, A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon by Sarah Hawley, The Lighthouse Witches by C.J. Cook, The Haunting Season by various authors, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, and Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer. The State of Grace is a young adult book about an autistic teenager navigating high school and social relationships. and it was so relatable. I was disappointed by A Witch's Guide to Fate Dating a Demon, not because the book was bad, it just wasn't what I was expecting. The Lighthouse Witches was a magical thriller drawing on historical references of the Scottish witch trials. The Haunting Season is a collection of spooky short stories which were perfect to be read for Halloween, and although I don't usually like short stories, I enjoyed this as it was a seasonal read. The Very Secret Society for Irregular Witches was a delightful, charming and cosy book to read. Midnight Sun is a follow-on from the Twilight Saga, written for the fans, and written from Edward's perspective. It's basically the same book as Twilight, but from Edward's point of view, and I found it so nostalgic. I was a huge Twilight fan back in the day, and reading this has reminded me how much I want to reread the series. My favourite book for October had to be The Lighthouse Witches, as it was so gripping, but it was hard not to pick up the whimsical Secret Society of Irregular Witches for my favourite. On to the penultimate month of 2023. In November, I read 4 books: The Secret History by Donna Tartt, Pine by Francine Toon, The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. The Secret History is basically the embodiment of dark academia, and was dark and twisted and reminded me a lot of The Great Gatsby. Pine was an atmospheric, eerie thriller set in Scotland, and was a perfect read for early November as the book started on Halloween. The House in the Cerulean Sea was a fantastical story about magical beings and found family, and the protagonist was LGBT, which is always refreshing. To Kill a Mockingbird is a classic that I've had on my TBR for years, and I was not disappointed. It discusses several differences in society that are still relevant today. November was a really difficult month to choose a favourite for, as all 4 books were equally brilliant in their own unique ways. I chose The House in the Cerulean Sea, but it could easily have been any of the other 3. In December, I read 2 books, Fourth Wing and Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros, and I didn't read any of the Christmas books I planned to read. Life really didn't go to plan in December, so my reading was slow, but I was absolutely transported by these books, and I was so grateful for the escape. I haven't really read much fantasy since I was a teenager, but I think these books will change that for me. I was literally dreaming of these books through the whole of December. They're like Hunger Games meets dragons. It's not really like I can pick between the 2 for a favourite, as they're 2 halves of a whole, but I picked Fourth Wing as it's the first in the series. Now onto the book brackets. I've put in the books for each month here, and now they get to battle it out for the next level. Choosing between Book Lovers and Hamnet was a challenge, but I chose Hamnet for its enchanting narrative and for the fact that I thought I wouldn't like it but ended up loving it. Still Life won over I'm Glad My Mum Died for a similar reason. Historical fiction isn't my genre, but this book transported me and the writing was brilliant, although it was sad to leave behind McCurdy's memoir. Picking between The Chemist and The Girl on the Train was easy. The Chemist gets this spot as I stayed up late reading because I was having such a good time. The Night She Disappeared gets this spot for the same reason, I just couldn't put it down. The next choice was the most difficult of all because both Spells for Forgetting and The Lighthouse Witches are atmospheric, witchy thrillers, so they were quite similar in many ways, and I was blown away by both. But I chose The Lighthouse Witches as I was impressed by the background research, the time travel element, and the resources included in the back of the book about the witch trials. Finally, the last choice was easy to make. Both books were amazing, but Fourth Wing has started a love for a series that I haven't felt since high school. Now on to the next level, where these 6 books battle it out for top 4. Picking between Hamnet and Still Life was difficult because I really wanted to pick Hamnet, but I couldn't deny how dazzled I was by Winman's writing. For the same reason, I had to pick Still Life against The Chemist. The Lighthouse Witches won against Jules' thriller, but Fourth Wing won against The Lighthouse Witches. Now we go to round 3 where I pick my top 2. By default, the next 2 books are already chosen. Still Life against Still Life equals Still Life, and Fourth Wing has already won against The Lighthouse Witches, which makes it the winner of the second half of the year. Finally, to pick my favourite book of 2023. Between Still Life and Fourth Wing, I had to pick Fourth Wing. Winman's writing was exquisite and worthy of its numerous awards, but Fourth Wing really blew me away and provided an escape when I needed it. I also think that Fourth Wing has swayed me to consider reading more fantasy in 2024. So there we have it, my favourite book of 2023, Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. If you're still watching, thank you so much. I promise my next videos won't be like this and will actually contain some video clips. Have you ever used book brackets? Let me know in the comments, and remember that my template is available on Instagram if you would like to use it to reflect on your own reading year. I'll see you soon. Please subscribe for notifications of my next video. Bye!